We'll turn that on. That's no surprise to any of you who've been on Zoom calls. And yes, the recording will be available for any of you who are registered to this webinar to receive in the future. Thanks very much and welcome to all. I'm Jeanette Gurung, the founder and executive director of WOCAN, who's the host of this CSW parallel event. Welcome to everybody. And as mentioned, please do introduce yourself in the chat session, in the chat box. Tell us who you are, maybe your institutional affiliation, as well as anything else you want to say about your engagement in the nexus of gender and climate. I will be moderating this session, assisted by Maria Elena, who's on the back end here and helping me with this. You will be muted. This is a webinar and not a Zoom meeting. So the way this works is you have free access to the chat and to the Q&A box, but probably unless you're unmuted for a reason, you don't have the opportunity to speak. We do hope you will use both the chat box and the Q&A box to put in comments, questions, whatever. We will all be monitoring those, but in particular, Maria Elena will be watching for those as the rest of us are speaking. So the way this is going to run today, we are very pleased to have with us three extraordinary panelists. We know quite well, and we think they have something extraordinary to add to the conversation that's going on here today about financing women's organizations and entrepreneurs using climate finance and markets. I will very briefly introduce each of these, and then they will do a better job of introducing themselves, and they will each have about 10 minutes to tell you about their own work in relation to this topic. And then we will, if there are any clarifying questions, please do add those in the chat as we go along. We can take a minute or two at the end of each session to clarify. Otherwise, save your questions until the end. I think we should have plenty of time for questions and a discussion. So I will like to, before we begin, start a poll, find out who's in the room. So this first question, please do answer. I know sometimes it's hard to fit yourself into one box. I have that problem myself, but do the best you can with that. Just take it. Okay, we've got 66% of you answering this question. So I will show you who we've got in the room. It is all, which is wonderful to see. Let's mix between NGOs, women's organizations, and corporates as well. So thank you very much. Okay, with no further ado, I will begin the session. We will, as I mentioned, I will set the stage for this further discussion with some basic ideas and lessons we've learned here at WOCAN about this topic of working at the nexus of gender and climate. We have been, WOCAN is Women Organizing for Change in Agriculture and Natural Resource Management. We are a global body. I will tell you more about this in a minute, but before we begin the slideshow on my presentation, we will say that we have been working at this nexus of gender and climate for a very long time. And it's been very difficult to get a lot of people in the world in both the climate community and the gender lens and gender community to understand the perspective of the other. So I'm really thrilled to tell you that I think this has changed in a big way. And that's most noticeable, I think, in Glasgow at the COP, when for the first time, as I like to say, we heard these three words in the same sentence: gender, climate, and finance. I had never heard that before at the COP. And so I think it's changed. And we are now at the time when people are looking for what are those connections between the two and how do they support them. So it's an exciting time. And that's coming from both public and the private sectors. We heard from pledges from a lot of governments at the COP this year. However, those are pledges and their commitments are not yet in line with those. And we don't have recent data for this, but we did see that the number that we're hearing around the CSW a lot is the 3% number, that 3% of climate finance is linked to gender and women's empowerment. It's a very difficult number to come up with because a lot of government commitments in particular are for international development, and some of that is certainly related to adaptation. And so it's a crossover between the two. But in general, it's been the case that even in the adaptation finance, it's less than 3%. That's primarily to support gender equality, but about a third of that finance mentions women as beneficiaries. The climate level finance, that is about a third, again, that was back in 2014. We don't have more recent data, but it's hopefully gone up a bit since then. But we know it's very, very far from where it needs to be. And the other takeaway from this is this funding is not going to women's organizations. So even if it's targeted for gender, it's very, very rare to find this money going down, in particular to women's organizations at the grassroots level. So there's over 50 international public funds, there's 45 carbon markets, there's 6,000 private equity funds, all providing climate change finance. But it's obviously the architecture is complex and it's wrought with huge challenges for women to access. And I should mention as well, even the data shows that about 80% of climate finance is for loans and not grants. So that gives you an impression as well of where we are with this. So much work needs to be done to engender the whole field of global climate finance, both publicly and private sectors. But we want, and especially in ways that build on the knowledge we already have, that investing in women will yield more effective and efficient climate outcomes by building synergies with poverty, economic development, aid, and other forms of assistance, and channeled to support community level women's groups and activities, as well as entrepreneurs. So the question here that we've invited the panelists to address is, how can climate finance and markets enable women entrepreneurs and local women's groups to benefit from climate mitigation and adaptation projects? So I would like now to first provide the first presentation, and that's because I want to again set the stage for this. So Maria Elena, if you could take it to the next slide. So first, this is just very quickly, so you know who we are. I've already mentioned this, but we do provide this kind of services for gender mainstreaming training of women's leadership, gender action plan development for some of the climate funds, and technical assistance for the W+ standard, which you're about to learn more about. What is this? This is the W+ standard. If you haven't heard about it, it is the first certification standard framework that it provides metrics and procedures to quantify, verify, and monetize women's empowerment results within projects, not within the companies themselves necessarily, and also for supply chains. We founded this in 2015 out of sense of frustration, which I believe is the mother of invention. We did it because we've been doing a lot of gender mainstreaming training, but we understood that was not sufficient and not a very good way to measure. It's not a very good metric to say that we've provided training on gender integration. It also wasn't producing the desired results. We decided we needed to incentivize those actors that we've been providing this kind of training to. For us, most frequently, actors in agriculture, forestry, water management, and these type of technical sectors. But most importantly for WOCAN was this need to create a new revenue stream for women's organizations. And that is because of our own very strong sense and understanding that there are women's collectives, women's organizations around the world that represent a great untapped potential to scale up the kind of action to simultaneously meet the needs for women's empowerment, gender equality, and climate action. So we received, we built the standard 2015. We will see more about it. We received an award from UNFCCC in 2016 for the proof of concept. It is a way to quantify commitments related to SDG 5. It gives a monetary value to results. It's outcome-based payments, and it works around a market and results-based financing mechanism, and importantly provides a new channel to provide that kind of new revenue stream to women's organizations at the community level. We're also proud to say that we're part of the Verified Carbon Standard, which is the standard most used in the world for carbon reductions, and it provides a label on top of the carbon credit. Next. These are the 6 areas, the domains that we call them, for measurement of women's empowerment within these areas. These were determined by groups of, we have meeting with women's groups in Kenya and in Nepal, asking them this question: how would we know women's empowerment when we see it? And what would we be measuring? And they came up with these 6 areas. Our experts then developed the methods that incorporate qualitative and quantitative methodologies to assess each of these areas. We should mention here that in order to use it, you only need to choose one of these domains, but you could choose 6 if you wanted to. Next. How it works is basically here, a project that could be a climate project, doesn't necessarily have to be, but for the purposes of this workshop or webinar, we'll talk about climate. Let's say you have a climate project. You register, you determine which of those 6 domains are most appropriate to the kind of results you've been able to generate. You establish a baseline with the use of the indicators and the methodologies that the W+ standard has for each of those 6. After some time, you establish the baseline through survey questionnaires. After some time, you can go back, measure the results of your project's initiatives. It's then monitored by a third-party auditor, and then the W+ units are generated, are issued by WOCAN, and then those are listed on a registry. That's what assures the transparency and the accountability for those, and then those are for sale. Once those units are sold, the women of the project area receive at least 20% of the value of those unit sales. This provides the additional benefits to women through this direct channel of income. Hold on to your verifying questions until the end of my presentation when we get to those. Okay, next. So it's a triple win solution. So women benefit by, 1, the benefits that are generated through the project itself, but 2, also by this revenue stream, this benefit sharing that comes in the form of a grant to women's organizations within that project area. The climate project developers are also benefiting because the sale of the units bring to them a reimbursement for the cost of project activities. Of course, we are hoping that that means it's going to incentivize them to do even more activities in the following year. It also pays for the measurement, and it should also generate a profit for those companies. For the unit buyers, on the other end, they are getting the verified outcomes for SDG 5. They're getting what we call social returns that can actually be quantified and can be also understood as a monetized social return, because they do have a market value, even if the person doesn't want to sell it, for example, as an investor. Next. Here's a concrete example of the one that we won the award for, and you could see more. There's a link here. There's a short video with narrated video on this. But basically, this is the case of a project in Nepal that was where the government was establishing these biogas units at the household level for across the country, and it was generating carbon credits out of the production of these biogas units. As you can see in the photo, it was really women's labor, as I say, unpaid, that enabled the functioning and the maintenance of those biogas digesters that resulted in the climate mitigation. They were no longer cutting fuel wood from forest, which is a big problem in a country like Nepal. And it presented these carbon units, which the government was selling to a European country. So we went in there with the W+, we chose the time domain, and we measured this time saving of almost 2.5 hours per day for these women who were no longer walking to the forest, carrying the wood load and managing the wood. By eliminating that task, women gain time for leisure self-improvement. So we're also looking at what do they do with that time, making sure that that time saved is not in fact used in an even worse way, because that would not be a positive benefit. So we found out what they were doing amazing things, engaging more in community development and vegetable gardens and things like this. We also then sold some of those units and returned, gave that money to the women's groups in the project area. And then that is for them to decide what to do with it. It's their own self-determination. In this case, those women used it for what we could understand now as adaptation activities, to repair a water supply system, to diversify their agrobiodiversity, and to add money to their own savings and loans groups for a rainy day when they would need it. Next. This is a complicated slide, but I just wanted, there's a lot here to talk about, and I won't talk about it all, it would take too long. But just to say that the beauty of the W+ standard is also a design framework. So for those that don't quite know what to do and how to integrate gender into their climate projects, it provides the indicators and the way to do that. It also then generates a report of, more and more investors and companies and others are looking for the impact measurements and reports for how we know something is true. And as I say on the right side of the screen, it avoids the pink washing, which is when companies and others claim that they're doing something, but we can't really see significant changes on the ground. So this is what allows the confidence for people who are buyers of the credits to know that they've supported something that's real and material. As I mentioned, it provides a revenue source for the sustainability of projects. I mean, a group can monitor these changes year after year after year, and keeps that kind of sustainable financing going. So can you go back just real quick? And I think for me, the most important is the last one I put in pink. It's this mechanism that allows us to tap into climate mitigation financing, which is where the vast amount of funding for climate is. And it allows it to, because we're tapping into mitigation, because it's market-based, this enables a return to investors, a return of profits to the companies that are investing in this. At the same time, it has this grant funding mechanism through the transference of direct payments to those women's groups in the form of a grant. So I think this answers a lot of questions we heard at the COP this year from countries who are wondering, how do we get adaptation finance when there seems to be so much more preponderance of mitigation finance? So next slide, that's my last thing I'll say on this. It's just on the last slide to give you, Elena, to give you how to contact either Maria Elena is at the coordinator wplus.org, and there's my name, and we have 2 websites that you can refer to. So does somebody have a burning question? If not, we're going to move on to the next. Not necessarily burning, but a clarification question.
Looks like Stephanie Crocker does.
I gave the floor to Stephanie. Stephanie.
Steph, just unmute yourself.
You're muted.
Maybe she's having a tech. Let's move on
Okay.
and come
Let's
back.
move on, and then you can put that in the chat or whatever. Okay.
We also have another question from Nira Vandergist.
And Nira, is it a clarification question?
Nira?
Maybe we should hold questions till the end when we can have time to
So
go through.
Maria Elena, yeah, can you manage?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. All right. It's up to Maria Elena to decide how we manage the questions. So I'll leave it in your hands, Maria Elena, and otherwise we will continue to move on.
We also have one more question from Uzoamaka Nwamara.
Yes, please. Thank you very much for that presentation. And this is really great to see. I was just hoping if Jeanette could kindly let us know the kind of buyers you have, what the uptake is, what the pipeline is as well, and how you source projects. So we have our Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, and we've recently conducted some study. I like the example you used on gender. So we looked at the gender responsiveness of NDCs, and we're looking to develop projects. So I'm already seeing a potential to, get projects that can support this model you have and vice versa. And I just wanted to have an idea of your buyers and the process. I'm happy if we can do, if we can give an initial response, and maybe we can go in more detail at a later time as well.
Perfect. Great. Thanks for your question. And you'll hear more about this from certainly from Rachel. We've been around, as you see, for a few years. Uptake has not been huge because, as I said, I think the world didn't even understand what this was all about. Things are on switching now, and we're getting a much higher uptake. I'll let Rachel speak to the question of buyers, but we would really look forward to contact us. We would very much look forward to having a much more in-depth discussion with you and how we could work together to help you. So thanks very much for your indication of that. There's also a quick one I'll just say about from Akib Azim about GHG units anticipated there will be emissions. There are not emissions. We are not measuring carbon emissions ourselves, but we can apply the W+ standard as a label on top of a carbon emission. So working with the carbon project developer at the same time can simultaneously be measuring women's empowerment benefits. And then we have a way to link the two. So for a buyer, they're buying a single unit that's a W+ label, or they can do it without the label. They can also apply it as a standalone credit. Okay. Yeah, the fact the uptake hasn't been huge, this is something pretty revolutionary. So as I said, I think things are very much changing, and you'll see evidence of that in the coming presentations. I think that's a good place to move on. So Hannah, next I'd like to introduce Hannah Simmons. Hannah is she will tell you, she is the founder and CEO of ERA in Brazil. She's going to tell you all about that. Very inspiring. Let's go for it.
Thank you, Jeanette. Hello, everyone. It's a real honor to be here and share a little about ERA. and our mission and our hands-on and experience and view from the field. And yeah, I'd like to talk about how we are really implementing climate finance and gender impact in Brazil. So I'm based in Brazil. I'm actually from Canada originally, and I work in the Cerrado biome, which is this beautiful sort of grassland, forest land behind me, and it's the second largest biome in Brazil. But it's severely threatened due to the low protection and large advancement of the agricultural industry over this biome. So typically landholders, private landholders are converting to produce soy and grasslands, soy and cattle on the grasslands. And the Cerrado biome has already lost 50% of its original native vegetation for agriculture. So yeah, next slide, please. So ERA is a female-led carbon project developer. So 70% of our team are women, so we're very happy about that. And what is a carbon project developer? So we use carbon finance to save threatened forests and grasslands by providing landholders with payments for ecosystem services to maintain the carbon on their land and to not convert it to agriculture. So we then sell those carbon credits into the voluntary carbon market, and we return the value of those sales to landholders, communities, and biodiversity by applying the standards for those markets. So our project applies the verified carbon standard as well as the W+ standard to create carbon credits with certified gender co-benefits. So we use these standards, create units that can be sold into the market, and with that, we then return it to the communities, and we focus those impacts, those project activities on women. And now I'd like to talk a bit and dive into the specific project activities that we're implementing that are driving these gender impacts that we're monitoring using the W+ standards. So next slide, please. So first, we developed a learning hub at a local school. In Brazil, many rural families send their children to agricultural tech schools. So there we will be learning about how to work on a farm. Many of these local ag tech schools in Brazil only have two things in the curriculum: how to work at a soy field and how to work at a cattle ranch. So what we did is, okay, if we want to drive this transition to a more regenerative economy that doesn't convert land to soy or cattle, we need to come up with alternatives. So what we did is we partnered with the local school and we set up an agroforestry learning hub and offered this whole new curriculum to students to learn about other ways of managing land that are more regenerative and aligned with our climate agenda. So we set up a 1 hectare plot. We planted it in 5 days with 40 students. Around half were women. And we made a beautiful video with all these interviews of the young women there, and they were just so amazed and so happy. And they're like, I'm going to do this on my family's farm, and this is so amazing. I never knew. It just like opened up a whole new world for these youth, and I get goosebumps just talking about it. So that was sort of the foundation. So if we want to create change, we need to start with education. And that's one of the domains that we're actually looking at with the W+ standard, which is knowledge. So how are we impacting women's lives through knowledge and improving their knowledge in these alternatives and learning about agroforestry, which I personally think is one of the big wins for the future. So next slide, please. So after we set up the learning hub, we offer courses to youth and everyone in the community to learn about agroforestry and different holistic management practices. So last year we offered 5 courses. This year we're going to be offering double that. And we're just going to be scaling slowly and organically this program, and training people and providing people with this really amazing knowledge of how to create beautiful landscapes that provide food and resilience, right, to the communities and to the families. So next slide, please. And what we did is we supported about 5 women to establish their own agroforestry systems on their properties. So we selected 5 really enthusiastic women from the Learning Hub, and we said, let's go back to your farm. And we actually paid for the seedlings, the inputs, all of it. We basically gave them a cookie cutter agroforestry system, and their family is now having more income from selling the bananas, the cassava. There's a long-term species. In 5 years, they're going to be able to sell nuts. So we've created this now income generating system, which is another domain that we will be monitoring with the W+ standard. So this is another way that the W+ standard quantifies improvements to women's livelihoods. Next slide, please. And finally, one of our last project activity that's focused on women is we select women for a 200-hour advanced training. So we will actually accompany the woman, these 5 women, and help them understand management, because agroforestry systems are easy to implement, hard to maintain and manage. So the key of a successful agroforestry system is how to prune it properly, what to take out and use as green manure, where to give light to the the pioneer species and the different layers that you're managing for. So these women will get this advanced training, and our hope is that they will work for us in the future to become agroforestry technicians. And as we scale the program, they will be the ones, they will be mentors to other women. So we're creating this beautiful sort of organically growing system that is women powered. So next slide, please. So just going through our goals, we want to this year establish 3 new learning hubs and provide 50 women with financing to implement their own agroforestry plot. And how we're financing that is by selling the carbon credits from our conservation forest program, and that is driving the impact that we're able to do towards project activities focused on women and gender impact. So in 3 years, we hope to impact and empower 800 women in these 4 action areas, either through the courses, the advanced training sessions, or the agroforestry plots that they'll actually receive on their own family farms. And we plan to generate over 15,000 W+ credits in that 3-year time span within the 3 domains that we've selected, which is knowledge, leadership, and income. So those are our main domains that we're looking at. And we're really excited with the W+ standard, and we're seeing buyers really excited about these too. And that is what Rachel will be talking about next, what this market looks like. So you can head to the next slide. I'd like to leave you with my contact, because I think a big thing that we need to be focusing on as women is mentorship and helping each other. And I would love to help any aspiring entrepreneurs who need a little more knowledge about how to apply the standards. So please write my email down, get in touch, and I look forward to hearing from you all. And thank you very much for listening.
Isn't that incredible? I mean, I think what Hannah's doing is just the perfect example of smart thinking about how to use various types of climate financing to get to the kind of goals. And Hannah, you didn't even talk about your plans for that 20% back to women.
Of course, yes. Sorry about that. So 20% of the W+ credits, at least 20%, okay? We'll see how it all works out in the final economics of everything, but at least 20% is earmarked to go back to those 800 women. So when we sell those credits into the market, 20% of the revenues will go back to the women as a payment, and then she can then support her family and her livelihood. So that's a very important part. Thanks, Jeanette, for reminding me.
Thanks again, Hannah. And I love that photo with those young women. Those women look like they could tackle anything. They look
Yes.
tough and ready to go. So love it. Love very much what you're doing. So thanks very much. Okay,
Thank
with
you.
no further ado, thanks, Hannah. We will move to Rachel. Now, Rachel is interesting because she's the founder and the CEO of a brand new company as of today, I believe, officially launches. This is a big day for Empower Co., something that's been in the works for a long, long time. So Rachel, take it away on your day of the launch.
Oh, thank you, Jeanette. Well, I couldn't have done it without you and the other amazing women that are on this call with me. Empower Co., I'm going to be sharing my screen here, is launching today, as Jeanette said, and it is designed to build the market for W+ units. Can everybody see, Jeanette, can you see this screen? Just this is a single slide. Okay, great. So there we go. Empower Co. is here to amplify the power of women, and we are going to do that by building the world's first transparent and robust voluntary market for W+ units. So some of you on this call listening in may be familiar with other types of markets, as Jeanette spoke to earlier, as it relates to different environmental commodities. We don't yet have a market for a way to power women's empowerment, and that's what Empower Co. is here to do. So I wanted to share this visual with you to sort of put everything into perspective. So Hannah just gave us a beautiful example of what a W+ project can look like, which is at the top of your screen here as number 1. So the W+ standard measures women's empowerment in one of those 6 domains that Jeanette spoke about earlier. And out of that, eventually, comes W+ units, which are issued units that live on IHS market registry, which may sound like gibberish to some of you, but that's the global platform for units that are involved in the climate markets and in other places. So they're all on the official systems. And then Empower Co. works directly with project developers once they have those issued units to align them with buyers who are into women's empowerment already or have goals or targets around it and don't know how to achieve them. And I'm going to speak to that a little bit more in a moment. And as we know, when women are supported, we achieve better outcomes across all SDGs. So these units are really about supporting the initial activities that support women, but they represent a much broader scope of impact, some of which we can't measure right now. And then one of the differentiating factors between Empower Co. as a company and W+ as a standard is W+ requires 20% back to women, as you heard about at the time a transaction occurs. We as a company, Empower Co., require 50% of proceeds go back to women. We believe that we will be able to create a market with a price point that can support that kind of sharing. And we also believe that, as we know, when money is put directly into the hands of women, research and data, and some of us with our own direct experience, it has proven that women do remarkable things in both climate mitigation, adaptation, also with community health, et cetera. So this is sort of the ecosystem of women's empowerment, is what I like to call this slide. It is every piece of how we are going to build this market together with everyone at the table. And just to be clear, a buyer for Empower Co. and for these units looks like a corporation. In some cases, it may be a large financial institution, and in other cases, less likely but possible, it could be a government. So just to get into a couple of the projects we're launching with, we would love to launch with Hannah's project, but unfortunately those units are not yet available for us. But we do have an incredible livelihoods project in Morocco. As you can see on your screen, that project decided to measure under income and assets and knowledge and education. I won't spell everything out, but you can see here the increase in those areas for women. And the same on the right side, we have a biogas project in Nepal that increased time savings for women, which also led to other incredible outcomes that aren't necessarily represented right here. But I love this quote from Aziza in Morocco, who's part of the project there, that the cooperative has ultimately created an impact in bringing about positive economic change in the region, especially for women farmers like me. I think this is so powerful because, as Jeanette knows from building WOCAN and her many years in this space, positive economic change for rural women farmers is not something that you normally connect and is difficult to do. So this type of work is just incredible with the way it's changing the norms of how things have been for women around the world. There's also something that I wanted to, sorry, I'm just going to go back here. Going back to this slide, I just want to talk I want to add a little bit more color into the market because a lot of you have had questions about the market. Some of you on this call know about the carbon markets, both voluntary and compliant. Some of you don't. To be very clear, we only operate in the voluntary market. And to just put this into perspective, over 85% of the Fortune 500, so 500 of the world's largest corporations, now disclose sustainable development goals. And gender equality is one of the top areas of focus for companies who have any commitments around SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And so there's this tremendous opportunity to support those goals by purchasing W+ units. But as we've talked about before, there really hasn't been a platform to support the awareness that these units even exist. The concept has been proven. The UNFCCC awards have been won. The endorsements are there, and nobody's out there actually selling these. And so to further put this into perspective, it's estimated that the global voluntary market in terms of carbon could be worth upwards of 50 billion by 2030. And if we compare that to achieving a single goal of gender equality, SDG 5, could contribute up to 28 trillion USD to global GDP by 2025. So the opportunity for a market here is tremendous and it's untapped. And who am I to do this, you might ask? Well, I'm a woman who really cares about all of this. I grew up in a family environment where I had a single mother who struggled a lot. So firsthand, I've seen the struggles many women go through, even in the US. I became an investment banker and trader at the ripe age of 21 and was the highest grossing trader on my trading desk of all men in New York. I went on through a stroke of luck, it feels like divine luck, to be part of the team that developed the world's first Red Plus project. I decided being a trader was not for me, and I changed my career, and I was lucky enough to work with a group called Wildlife Works, which many of you may know, who develops Red Plus projects around the world, and we happen to have the first validated and verified Red Plus project in Kenya. I was then responsible for going out and creating the market around Red Plus and educating the market about what Red Plus was, what it had to offer, and how it could help companies achieve various goals and targets that they had from an environmental perspective. That market was started in 2011 by myself and some colleagues, and now it has grown to become something incredible. I think Pamela Brazier might be on this call, who is at the forefront of that right now, and is a former dear colleague of mine. And so I'm not afraid to go out there and talk about new concepts and ideas that have deep meaning and impact. And that's what this is. And so as we think about building this market, it really comes down to this for me. I used to be someone's wife, but now they know me by my name. That's Nima from Nepal. Women everywhere deserve to not only be valued for their unpaid labor, for what they contribute to society, but they deserve the dignity of being seen in the world and being heard. And so beyond just EmpowerCo being a place where we develop the market for W+ units, we are also a place where we are elevating the conversation around what women's empowerment really is and involving these women's voices in the conversation directly, which we'll do in a variety of ways going forward. So thank you for listening. I look forward to your questions. As Hannah said, there isn't many of us. in this work in terms of women who are kind of on the forefront of pushing innovative and new ideas. So if you would like to be in touch, please feel free to reach out, and I look forward to being in touch with many of you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. You can understand how, as Rachel sees, this brokerage is starting to fill in the gap for building the demand side of this, which is, we feel very strongly, the most important cog in this wheel that's going to generate a lot more use of the W+ standard and a lot more understanding of the connections to climate change. And one thing, I think it's just a perfect timing for Rachel's launch of this company, also because in the world of the carbon markets, there is now very much, in voluntary carbon markets, there's very much now a push for what they're calling high quality carbon, which is necessarily got a co-benefit attached to it. Co-benefit usually means a social impact or something that's related to an SDG. And in at least some of the carbon markets, they're talking about high quality carbon. An indicator of that is women's empowerment. That's a huge milestone for us to get that very male dominated boys group of carbon developers and brokers. So Rachel's really breaking new grounds with this as a women-owned business in this field. And so we're so thrilled that she's been able to launch. So following Rachel, I think we have the perfect transition to Katie. Now, Katie is going to talk to you about what she's calling women climate entrepreneurs. And that is going to be an added piece into this large picture of how we see climate finance engaging in and benefiting more women. So Katie, take it away.
Thanks, Jeanette. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Turner, and really nice to be here with you today. As Jeanette mentioned, my presentation today is not related to W+, but it is very much related to the intersection of women and climate. I'm an independent consultant, and I've got lots of experience working in gender lens investing, the nexus of climate and gender, ecosystem development. And I wanted to share today some research that I was part of that's led by WOSC, a Canadian organization. And it's a piece that came out just a couple of months ago, so very recent research on strategies for incubators and accelerators in sub-Saharan Africa to support women climate entrepreneurs. And my colleague Liam has just dropped in the chat box the link to the report, which is fantastic. So please take a look. Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. So the program that I mentioned is called Accelerating Women Climate Entrepreneurs. And it's a just over $2 million initiative that's focused on strengthening the ecosystem for women climate entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa, led by the Aga Khan Foundation in consortium with WOSC, which is a Canadian entity that I'm working very closely with now, and Andy, who many of you will be familiar with, and funded by the Canadian government, who is very focused on both, the Canadian government has a very strong gender agenda, as well as a strong focus on climate finance. They've just recently announced a doubling of their climate portfolio to 5.3 billion. So they're looking very closely in this area. And what is a women climate entrepreneur? So as Jeanette mentioned, this is the term that we're using in our research. It's a term that perhaps not everyone is familiar with, and actually it was a new term for me when I started this research last year. The way that we're defining WCEs is threefold. So it could be a woman who is promoting green growth directly, for example, a woman who's selling solar panels. It could be indirectly. So for example, someone who is using renewable energy to power their operations, or it could be in a supporting role, such as a consultant who is a woman consultant who is offering training related to climate change. So there's a few different ways we define that. And it is aligned with the small and growing business definition, which Andy uses, and many of you would likely be familiar with. So an entrepreneur or a company that has between 5 and 250 employees and is looking for growth capital between $20,000 and $2 million. So that just to start us off, so we're on the same page, that's how we're defining a woman climate entrepreneur. When we did our research, those were the types of women that we spoke with. Next slide, please. And why do we focus on WCEs? So this has pretty much been covered already. I think all of us on the call understand the opportunity to work with women climate entrepreneurs, that $28 trillion opportunity, which Rachel mentioned as well, in terms of, you know, what the opportunity if we're able to reach full gender equality. We all know the disproportionate effect of climate on women. We also know that because women are key managers and primary users of natural resources, that they're not only disproportionately impacted, they have a huge opportunity and a huge level of innovation and ability to contribute to climate solutions. And so there's more than enough reason to focus on women climate entrepreneurs who have traditionally been undervalued, unrecognized, and invisible in many of these solutions. And also, as Jeanette mentioned, I mean, it's really, really exciting to know that this is really becoming a part of part of the global conversation. When Jeanette mentioned about, you know, the conversations at COP26, it's just really exciting to hear the intersection, and that this nexus is finally being recognized as an opportunity. Next slide, please. So for me, one thing that's really important when we did our research is, you know, we know the opportunities for women, but in order to really address the opportunities and to come up with solutions, we have to understand what are the underlying factors, what are the underlying issues and constraints that these women climate entrepreneurs are facing, because if we don't really understand those, we're just offering band-aid solutions. So this is the research framework that we followed. As you can see on the left, we've spoke with a number of different stakeholders, system stakeholders, incubators and accelerators, and women climate entrepreneurs. And we came up with 4 calls to action or recommendations that you can see there. And we also came up with a number of underlying factors, which, as I mentioned, are really, really critical in developing solutions that actually respond to the challenges that women climate entrepreneurs are facing. And one thing that I should mention is this report primarily focuses on strategies for the incubator and accelerator segment of the ecosystem. Of course, there's lots of opportunity for all different ecosystem actors to contribute to this area, but the design of the research was really focused on incubators and accelerators, primarily because they play a significant role in supporting women climate entrepreneurs at that sort of initial startup level stage. And there's there are a number of gaps right now, which we uncovered. So I'm just going to share a few recommendations with you, whet your appetite, and really hope that you take some time to read through the report and take a look at some of the other findings. Next slide, please. So one of the first ones is capacity building and gender equality. So basically what we found is, while there's many incubators and accelerators out there who are supporting climate entrepreneurs, there's a lack of understanding and capacity on the gender piece. So gender has not been really integrated into the design of these programs, and therefore is not meeting the needs of women climate entrepreneurs. So one fantastic example of an incubator that's doing this very well is the Ghana Climate Innovation Center. They have a program called the Women Entrepreneurs Transformation Program that basically responds to a number of the issues and challenges that women face in terms of work-life balance, in terms of increasing their confidence, particularly in this male-dominated sector, and really being proud of their innovations and leading with empathy, which again is not that common in this male-dominated sector. So it really, as I said, it responds to a number of the underlying factors that women are facing. And I think it's a really fantastic example of a combination of a climate program that is really taking into consideration some of these underlying gender norms that are so critical to understand. Next slide, please. So the next recommendation is around partner engagement, and I'm a huge believer in partner engagement and collaboration because this is an ecosystem problem. It requires ecosystem solutions. It requires a huge amount of engagement and collaboration. There's a number of different partnership opportunities in the space, of course. One thing that we heard time and time again from the women climate entrepreneurs that we interviewed is that oftentimes the incubators and accelerators will offer great services, great support to them, but there was lacking a connection to financial institutions who could really help them to get to that next level of growth. So the incubators and accelerators might offer small amounts of grant funding that would help them develop their website or help them increase their capacity in certain areas, but they were really looking for more concrete connections to financial institutions, to help them to grow their business. There's a lot of women we talked to who said that they would go from accelerator program to accelerator program because they just weren't able to get to that next level of growth. A really good example of this type of collaboration is the Kenya Climate Innovation Center, who's another climate-focused accelerator program that is partnering with the Kenya Bankers Association and an initiative called Financial Sector Deepening, which is active across sub-Saharan Africa. So basically, they've recognized that climate is a new area. A lot of financial institutions are not familiar with climate finance. They don't understand what it means. They don't understand how to develop products and services for climate entrepreneurs. And so these three partners are working together to develop products and services specifically for climate entrepreneurs. And as it says in the second point there, it's not specifically focused on women climate entrepreneurs, although women are included in the segment that they're piloting. So this is a pilot that just started very recently, and they are looking at doing a deeper gender analysis to really ensure that those underlying issues, those gender norms are taken into consideration as these financial products are being developed in the climate finance space. Next slide, please. And then the final recommendation that I wanted to share is around mentorship and networking, which is so critical in this space. As I mentioned, this is male-dominated sector. There's not a lot of success stories of examples of successful women climate entrepreneurs. Not that they don't exist, but there needs to be more promotion of these role models who can serve as mentors, as role models for other women that are looking to grow their businesses in this space. A number of the women climate entrepreneurs we mentioned said that they just didn't have a lot of confidence to pursue their business opportunity because the climate space in sub-Saharan Africa is so new. A lot of the gender norms that they're up against in terms of it's a male-dominated business, a lot of their family and communities just sort of laughed at them or disrespected them because they didn't have confidence in the ability of a woman to run a climate business. So that's really hard, right? That's a huge obstacle for these women, and they need more role models. A good example of an organization that has recognized this issue is PFAN, the Private Financing Advisory Network, which is essentially a global climate finance accelerator program that supports climate businesses across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And they, up until very recently, did not think about gender at all. But in the past 6 to 8 months, they've started working with Value for Women, who's a very well-known gender advisory consultancy, to develop their gender strategy. So PFAN has over 140 local advisors, climate advisors. And basically what they've recognized is that they don't understand gender. Most of them are men. Most of these advisors are men. Most of them do not have an understanding of how to support women entrepreneurs, women climate entrepreneurs. And so there's a lot of awareness raising that's needed to understand what are the specific challenges that these women climate entrepreneurs are facing, and how can we better support our advisors to support these women climate entrepreneurs. And then specifically getting back to the mentorship piece, they also wanted to develop a strategy to attract more women advisors, because as I mentioned, most of these advisors are men, and the women climate entrepreneurs that we spoke with really said that they prefer working with women advisors who really understand where they're coming from, who understand the obstacles that they're facing in terms of work-life balance, in terms of, you know, some of the social norms that they're up against in growing their business. So there is that recognition by PFAN that they need to be sourcing and identifying more advisors, more climate advisors who are women. Next slide, please. Oh, well, that comes to the end of my presentation. So I hope that those 3 recommendations have been helpful in just giving you a sense of some of the research that we did. There's lots more great content in the report, so feel free to take a look, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Katie. You can see that this is really groundbreaking research, and I can see Hannah nodding her head very strongly when you're talking about the need for role models. And I would like to offer, Hannah, you yourself are going to be a role model in this, girl, like it or not. But there's a need to create a whole network around this. So I think it's very, very exciting and an exciting piece of this space around climate financing. I think we will stop now and open it up for questions. Maria Elena, do you want to jump in?
Sure. We have one question in the Q&A by Amanda Ellis. How can we help you scale up? And I think this came in when you, Jeanette, were making the presentation.
I would like to suggest that you enable Amanda to speak. And Amanda, you yourself are an absolute powerhouse in this area of women entrepreneurs. And I think you will be able to answer that question really well from your perspective as well. So, Elena, can you enable Amanda's mic so she can speak?
I don't see Amanda.
Oh dear, she left. How dare she?
Yes.
Amanda's actually an advisor to WOCAN and a good friend and someone who knows the W+ standard very well. She works very closely with Vital Voices and some of the networks that are really around women-led SMEs and women-led businesses. A very well-respected leader in this field who gets very, very excited about W+. So I think her question is excellent, and then I think we should pose it out to any of you on the panel or any of you in the audience as well as to what you can do or what we can do collectively to scale this up. Anybody on the panel would like to say anything on that?
Well, yeah, sure. So what we found with building the market, the voluntary carbon market, specifically around REDD+, was once there was large corporate buyers involved, there was the snowball effect, both on the demand side. Demand creates more demand, and both on the supply side with project developers being able to see that there was a real opportunity and it was worth their investment to put the time and energy and all of the things Hannah knows about very well that it takes to correctly implement a project with integrity and meeting all of these standards. And the W+ is certainly a very robust standard, so it's no joke to go through the process. And I'm not just saying that in a self-serving way. I know EmpowerCo is the one making those connections happen with sales, but I think, Jeanette, you would agree that the question we get so often from project developers is, well, who's buying these and what is the price? And, you know, people want to know what is the opportunity? How do they, where does this land? So I think we already have some supply, which is great. We already have women like Hannah who are getting behind this and going full forward with W+ implemented into their project. But in order to scale that side of things with even more women being impacted, we need the market to get moving. And that's why I'm so motivated to do it.
I'd like to add a few things there. So from my perspective, I think carbon finance and specifically REDD+ projects and agroforestry projects and projects that generate carbon credits are an amazing vehicle to finance gender impact that then you can create W+ credits from. So it's sort of this beautiful revolving fund that you create. But I find that there's a lack of project developers. I mean, if you look at the price of carbon over the, pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, it's more than doubled. So what does that mean? That means that there's more demand than supply of credits. So how can we increase the supply of credits? We need more project developers. So I invite the women and the women's groups on this call to learn about the standards, learn how they can engage with the standards. And we need more knowledge and knowledge sharing, because these standards are not easy. So I find that there is a barrier to entry into this market, because it's complex. I mean, you need a very multidisciplinary team to make this happen, right? You need forest engineers, geographers, biologists, software engineers, lawyers. Like, I have a serious multidisciplinary team behind me making this all happen. So yeah, I think to make this scale, we need more people doing impact and applying the standards. So I invite everyone to become climate project entrepreneurs, and yeah.
And I think if I can jump in, there's another barrier to entry that I think could really be a game changer, and that would be if women's organizations, women entrepreneurs, women's climate entrepreneurs could be provided pre-financing about, particularly if they're going to engage in carbon markets, and the demand is so huge, and we know it is. It's a great time to come into carbon markets if you're not already there. But it's complicated because it is expensive, as Hannah's mentioning. And if there's a lot of talk in the involuntary carbon markets, recognizing this as an obstacle to allowing the smaller project developers to get engaged. And they've identified if they could provide pre-sales, pre-financing. So in other words, and Rachel's certainly ready to do this as well, if she gets a corporate or another buyer that says, I understand you don't have the supply immediately available, but we will pre-purchase a certain X number of, for example, carbon units with W+, then that's a beautiful position. And then that's the kind of thing that then could be providing those women entrepreneurs with the opportunity to jump in. Other ideas, Katie?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I guess my perspective really builds on what I was saying earlier about having a very good understanding of the gender norms, the social norms, these barriers that women are facing, because women, have different challenges, very specific challenges that they face, particularly in this climate space. And I think there's largely, I mean, even when we talk about women entrepreneurs in general, regardless of sector, there's a huge number of obstacles that they face. When you talk about women climate entrepreneurs, there are even more obstacles because it's a male-dominated space, because climate is already new in many markets, in most markets. So there's this need for, and I know in gender lens investing in general, there's this discussion about the need for translators, these translators between the world of finance and the world of gender. And I think the same can be said for this space, where there's a lot of terminology, and as you're saying, there's a lot of terminology that's quite difficult, quite complex for everyone. And so having these types of translators who can help to sort of break down those silos is really, really critical, and is going to help a lot to move and to scale and to accelerate in this area.
Thanks so much, Katie. Maria Elena, do you have another question?
There is one more question by Megan White. How do you plan to connect with the growing ESG market? And who are your key clients? Who are you targeting to move this change forward in a real way?
I can answer that first. I'll take a stab. I wasn't going to complicate this discussion going into that direction, but it's really interesting to us that in addition to using the W+ standard within the voluntary carbon markets, the other pathway that's looking really large and promising is the use of the standard within what's increasingly being called impact-linked or outcome-linked finance, not necessarily focused on climate, right? And that is interesting because as impact investors, as we know, there are a lot of investors who call themselves impact investors, but quite frankly, they're still looking for very large financial returns and pay more attention to that than the actual impacts. But there is also a growing group of people that are looking to measure impact in a very, very real, quantified manner. And there's even some that are offering payments that are linked to the achievement of impact. You will recall from Rachel's slide where she shows in the 2 concrete projects where she has W+ credits to sell, you can see how we're measuring and providing reporting on the percent of change. So we can actually, when you use W+, you get, in Morocco it was like 183%, right? This is huge. So we can give that actual number, and that's what a lot of investors are looking for. And I did recently a review of other certifications and standards to see how they were reporting on the quantity of the change. And I found nobody was doing this. I was really shocked, but it seems to be okay in most standards and frameworks to simply say, yes, check the box. I have seen a net positive benefit for women, right? And it doesn't even really specify that. And we think that's not good enough. And we know there's a lot of investors who are not happy with the do no harm kind of minimal requirements and really want to see their money put forward to something much more positive. So look in the future, we have a new funding partner, I can't announce it yet, but that is going to be funding pilots. I'm tired of doing pilots, but anyway, I get it. I understand why it's called a pilot. One that's related to voluntary carbon markets and one that is related to these ESG impact-linked finance. But would anyone else, Katie, do you have anything to add to that, or does anybody else want to talk about that perspective?
Well, I just think as this world evolves to not so carbon-centric impacts, so as companies develop other commitments to all of the SDGs, we will see a demand for certified claims, which is what the W+ standard is doing for SDG 5. So ERA is also developing a biodiversity token for SDG 15, which is life on land. So I personally see a future where each SDG is going to have frameworks around to quantify and measure so that buyers and corporates who are creating these commitments for the SDGs can buy these certified claims and not have any of this green pink washing stuff happening. So that's the future I hope to see and participate in creating.
You can see why Hannah's on the cutting edge. Indeed, and I have to say there's also a market that's evolving, that's an SDG market or SDG market, right? And even the carbon standards are now also including ways to quantify and generate SDG outcomes. So I agree. And I have to say, the other thing that was so exciting about the COP was carbon people were using the language of SDGs. I never saw that before. I never saw SDG and carbon market people come together. Carbon people can be pretty geeky, huh, Hannah? But increasingly, you know, they're turning towards what's now called high quality carbon credits. This is it's brand new. It's as we speak starting to be revealed, but this is the way everything is going, and hopefully buyers are going to be ready to pay the premium on top of a carbon unit to certify that it has community benefits and benefits that are SDG related. So I think it's the way to go.
I would just add to that, Jeanette, that there have been high quality carbon offsets for some time, but the appetite to spend what it costs to actually cover the operations of those projects that do deliver real benefits to community hasn't been there. And so, you know, the carbon markets have come a long way in the last 15 years. And we're at the point now where there's a deeper understanding of nuance, of unintended consequences, of what is quality, what isn't. And as Hannah was saying, I believe that that's going to become the way in which SDGs are looked at as well, because this pink washing that is a check the box exercise, as you referred to, Jeanette, is no longer something that we can accept as someone actually performing on a commitment to SDG 5. And that's where I see this being so incredibly powerful. And also carbon projects got wise to SDGs because that's where the money is. The corporates are aligned around SDGs. It's something that they see as important. It's something that makes them feel and gives them some kind of guidelines and guardrails to go for certain goals and targets. And so the market's moving in that direction. And so this is all to say that, the private sector has a lot of power and markets have a lot of power in how we direct money to change how things are going, both environmentally and as it relates to social impacts, biodiversity, all of this.
The other thing we could bring into this discussion, which is too infrequently mentioned by gender experts, is risk. And talk about investors, talk about ESG. The language of investors has to talk about the language of risk. And it's just to me, it's common sense that if you want to develop a good carbon reduction emissions project, you do so in a way that is going to be the least risk. And that means including the primary stakeholders. And if women are the farmers and the forest managers, water managers of the world, by God, they need to be involved in the decision-making and also in sharing the benefits if you want to reduce the risk of your investment. So, we've not used that word risk very much in gender communities, but it's what the language we need to learn to speak.
I agree. Risk
Yep.
reduction by including women is massive.
Yeah, there's so much talk in terms of in the gender lens investing space about what's the business case, what are the opportunities, and I think that's important. But what I have found, and many people have found in the GLI space, is that investors, companies respond more to risk. So leaving money on the table because you're not including women, missing out on opportunities, losing out to your competitors because you're not looking at these areas seems to resonate more.
Exactly. And I will say that the carbon market, and of course, there's a lot of criticism about carbon markets, no question, particularly all the gender people that I'm engaged with. There's always this idea that this is a negative thing, and the arguments. But the carbon markets did something really revolutionary, I think. And in the time those markets were formed, they were really formed also to drive new investments into environment sectors that were poorly and underfunded, particularly forestry. Right? And it was a way to build this very robust system, very transparent system of measuring impact and paying for that impact. And I think, I was absolutely inspired by that system, which is why we developed W+ standard, being inspired by the carbon market and the carbon standards and the rigor. And so as those markets, and they know they've sold cheap carbon in the past, and I think there's been a re-examination of that, and they're really trying to look at integrity. They're not perfect, but the other good news to share with you is we now infiltrated the boys network of who manages those carbon markets, the big boys and the big finance institutions. We pushed and pushed. We wrote a 9-page letter to them. Would you please add gender to it? Nothing but silence, silence, silence. And then 2 months ago, they actually hired one of our colleagues they hired means they paid her, which is incredible to me, to provide advice to them on how they integrate and make sure that gender outcomes are incorporated within this whole larger body of voluntary carbon. So we're there, girls. I mean, we're already there. We developed this thing years ago. It took a while for the world to catch up with us. But I think Rachel's launch, Hannah, you're spot on, and we can point to you, Hannah, as like, here she is, the woman climate entrepreneur who's showing how to bridge the carbon markets with women's empowerment. So we're right on the edge. We're right there.
Can I ask
Yeah.
a question related to that?
Please.
So, I mean, I'm just thinking about, you know, as I've done this research and as I've found out so much about different organizations working in the space, what can be done, or what can I do, or what can others do to promote W+, to promote WOCAN's work, to promote Empower, to make those connections, you know, and thinking specifically about our role for incubators and accelerators who are supporting these types of entrepreneurs. How can they help? Because obviously, you know, it takes a whole ecosystem, right? So what suggestions do you have?
Where to begin? I mean, we kind of devised a 5-year, I don't think it should take us 5 years, but who knows? We're underfunded, like every women's organization I know, right? But we devised a program that would take us stage by stage to get to the point where we can scale up. And I'll just tell you very quickly, the key components are to enlarge the number of projects that are using the W+. So we put those into 2 buckets. One are the climate project developers. And then the second bucket is more, Katie, to get, like what you're talking about, get more women like Hannah to become part of that climate project developer group, which, as you said, is vastly underpopulated, in part also to the need to demystify this, how you measure carbon and why, and to show them the financial returns you can gain from doing so, right? So those 2 buckets, so more of that, more buyers, just as Rachel said, that's the other really key component here. And by Rachel starting the brokerage, that's, you know, checking part of the box of doing the market demand and the building of the market, because we do feel that that's going to be the key link that does everything else. Then we want to go back and look at doing impact assessment when we get a large enough number of projects and say, what difference has that made to women of those project communities? The fact that this W+ is documented and measured, and that money has gone back to them, so what? At the end of the day, for us, that's really the key thing, is that grant money is also starting to flow to women's organizations. And then, you know, what else needs to happen for financial institutions, financial mechanisms? Does there need to be the creation of a new blended finance instrument, for example, that focuses on this, on gender and climate alone? Because we hear a lot of talk of different types of investors, including private individuals. Let's not leave out, we can focus on corporates, but let's also do something that enables private individuals to do something and to buy into this. And I think that's an important need that exists there. There's a lot of us are frustrated and disappointed and anxious about what goes on in the world. And we want to be able to show what we can do as individuals as well. So we need a mechanism that can kind of pool all those resources, and then, you know this very well, and then be an intermediary in the finance world, so that we can make sure the finance gets down to the smaller women entrepreneurs in a ticket size that addresses their needs. Any other ideas? Happy to hear. Or from the audience, anybody out there who has concrete ideas? Let's see any hands coming up, but I think you've answered, all of you, a lot of the other questions that I was about to ask about the biggest challenge you think these groups face. I know Katie did that very concretely, but would Hannah and Rachel, would you like to add anything more about that specific question on challenges? If not, that's okay. We can go on.
I think most of it's been covered. I mean, anytime you get into markets, you're getting into the boys club. That's still the reality. And so there is this piece of us being united in our efforts as women and being supportive of one another, whether that's through mentorship, through introductions, through financing. That's incredibly important, because we won't be able to change that norm until there's enough of us involved. And that's just a numbers game on every level, financially and individuals. So
that's a good point. Something we've talked about earlier is the need for more networking around the few women that are, not few, but we just don't, you know, we don't know how many are out there, but it doesn't seem to be large so far. But we need to be discussing and banding together. Hannah, do you have anything you want to add on that? Challenges?
I think I already touched on the challenges, which I really think breaks down to the technical expertise and the understanding of the market and the protocol. So this sort of knowledge gap and how to understand the terminology, as Katie was talking about, and how we need these translators. So I love that. And yeah, I want to think of ways that we can support one another in just decoding these protocols and methodologies, because they are 200-page documents, and there's a lot in them, right? So yeah, I see it as a knowledge, a bit of a knowledge gap, and how to break that barrier.
Okay. I did have a poll that I had put together to ask all of you in the audience what your ideas were, but for some reason I'm not able to find that. So sorry about that. Enlightening last minute one sentence, and could each of you, if you have one sentence you would like to say as a call to action, or just reiterate something important to say? Hannah, start with you.
Sure. So my call to action is for women and women's groups to educate themselves about the amazing standards that are out there and apply them to your projects and extract that additional value.
Great, thank you. Rachel?
Let's do this. It's time. I'm gonna go sell these things to every Fortune 500. Everybody better get in line with their projects, because there's gonna be a lot of buyers coming, and any introductions are appreciated. Thank you.
Spoken like a true businesswoman. Yeah, Katie?
Fix the capital, not the company. So this is something we talk a lot about in GLI. There's so much capital out there. It's that it's not designed to meet the needs of women entrepreneurs. So there's nothing wrong with the companies. It's the capital. Fix the capital, not the company. That, and by the way, that's from Joy Anderson. I cannot take credit for that, but I am using her fantastic phrasing.
Feminist manner, we share credit.
I have another one that's a zinger like that, Katie, that I heard the other day, and I can't say who said it actually, because it was just spoken off cuff. But it was quality comes before the name. And W+, your project, Hannah, there are so many quality efforts around the world right now that people aren't aware of. They don't know the name of it. They don't know the person behind it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Quality comes before the name. And we are those who are breaking new ground with a level of quality that hasn't existed in this form.
And Rachel, you know the term charismatic carbon. I mean, I always get laughs when I use that term, but it's not for nothing. It's charismatic carbon.
Yeah.
Maybe we get to get feminist carbon. That's a new hashtag we just started. Feminist carbon, right?
Okay.
We start that one. But anyways, we've come to the end of our time. This has been a fantastic discussion for me, and I hope for all of you in the audience. We will, of course, have the recording. It will be shared with all of you. But I want to express my greatest gratitude to the panelists. Great friends and great people that we hope to move forward with, and we'll be building this together, and we're on a roll. So I've kind of got I literally have goosebumps on my arm right now. I hope you do as well. This is the beginning of a great thing. So thank you very much, and thanks to all of you on the webinar for attending. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Congrats, Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Have fun tonight.
Party, girl. I wish we were all there with you too, but you know.
I'm going to start drinking right now. No, I'm
Yes.
just kidding. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.